All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We are now going to call the Reconvene Council meeting to order. I would note that Mayor Stewart is away on other civic business, so I will be stepping in as Deputy Mayor in his absence. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of our Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh partners, and we do thank them for having cared for this land since time immemorial and look forward to continuing to work with them as we build this great city together. I also want to recognize the contributions of our phenomenal staff at the City of Vancouver who work every day to do an incredible job. I see lots of smiles over there. We're very appreciative. And so without further ado, we will have the roll call, please, Clerk.
Yes. Mayor Stewart is absent on civic business and should be arriving later. Councillor Carr? Councillor DiGenova? Present. Councillor Fry? Councillor Swanson? Councillor Hardwick? Councillor Wiebe? Councillor Boyle is absent on civic business. Councillor Dominato? Councillor Bly is absent from the chamber, and Councillor Kirby-Young in the chair. The meeting has quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I would note for Council before we begin that we do have a short agenda today with just two administrative reports, Administrative Report 6 and 7. So there is no plan for a dinner break, and for those watching along or in the gallery, it's hopefully a plan to complete the business, because I have a feeling we're going to be fantastically efficient today. So there's my plug. Knock on wood. So we do have the two administrative reports. The first item on the agenda is an update to on-street car sharing parking policy. I would note for Council that staff had not planned to do a presentation, but if it is the will of Council, they could do a short introduction before we move on to Council questions. So, okay, I'm looking at everybody. Okay, I do see... I'm just going to acknowledge Councillor DiGenova first, since she's on the queue, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you. I thought it was a very thorough report and happy to waive presentation, but if others need the presentation, I do have questions on it, so I'm on the queue for questions also.
Okay, thank you, Councillor DiGenova. I'll just go to Councillor Wiebe, because you had indicated you'd have a preference to hear the presentation.
Yeah, I would like to see the introduction.
Okay. I think if there are some council that would find that valuable, and I know that staff have a brief intro that they're prepared to give, I'll ask if staff would be prepared to do that now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and Council. My name is Alina Cheng. I'm the manager of the Parking Management Branch. So today we are before you to propose some recommendations to changes to our parking policy with regards to car sharing. So we have 4 policies that we're hoping to bring forward. One is to allow one-way car sharing vehicles to end trip at parking meters. In this scenario, the members themselves would not be paying the meter during that time, but the car sharing organizations would. Number 2 would be to allow unpaid stopovers for car sharing vehicles at meters. So if you were to rent, for example, a 2-way car share and you parked at a meter during a lunch break or something like that, you would not need to pay the meters during that time. But again, the car share organizations would be paying for that time. The third is to waive parking permit fees for zero-emission car sharing vehicles. This is one way to incentivize car sharing organizations to transition their fleet to start including some zero-emission vehicles. And number 4 would be to charge a flat rate for reserved parking spaces for zero-emission car sharing vehicles as well. So currently we charge a rate based on a proportion of the parking meter revenue that would be lost if a car share vehicle reserved that spot. So we're aiming to lower those rates and create zones, one for the downtown, one for the Metro Core, and one for the rest of the city, to help, again, incentivize the use of zero-emission car sharing vehicles in the fleet. We see all of these incentives to help move forward with Council's climate emergency. In particular, big move number 2, which aims to shift mode share to have 2/3 of trips in Vancouver by active transportation and transit by 2030, as well as, in particular, big move number 3, to help achieve 50% of kilometers traveled be by zero-emission vehicles. So we are happy to receive questions from Council.
Thank you, staff, for the overview. Councillor DeGenova, you're up first, and I will remind Council that we do have, per our pilot procedure, 3 minutes for questions of staff. Please go ahead.
Information.
Yes, point of information? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I understood it to be 5 minutes for questions of staff.
I will just confirm with the clerk, but I was advised 3 before we started. Okay, you are correct, Councillor DeGenova. It will be 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do seem to remember that rule. And hopefully it won't take 5 minutes. But a question that I have, first of all, thank you to staff for many days and nights. I know it's taken us a while to get here. My questions are specifically, in looking at the report, it talks about the reason for this under the analysis on page 4 being to, offer options and encourage people sort of in a costly way to be using car sharing. I understand, and it was just clarified for me, that again, the car sharing organizations or companies would be paying for the meters during this time. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if they're going to be passing those costs on to their members who are car sharing, because if so, then that would actually make it less cost effective for some people, because I would assume that it would be the membership fees that would be going up, because unless they're going to pass those costs on. I understand they're not, that they're going to pay the costs themselves. So you might have some people who never park at meters who are going to be paying the costs for others who do park at meters. So I was hoping that you might be able to provide some information on if that was the case, and if so, how much they would estimate they would be raising their rates, or if you've spoken with them about that in the consultation process.
We have consulted with all 4 car share companies, and they are each looking at their own operations to see how they would absorb those costs. So I don't have the details on exactly how each company is planning to do that. But if you could imagine that if the per minute fee went up by 1 cent spread across the board, it might not be that noticeable compared to the benefit that residents and membership have by being able to park at the meters and be very close to the actual destinations that they want to go versus circling the neighborhood and parking, a few blocks away.
Okay. If it was 1 cent, I'd be happy to support that. My question to you is, do we have any idea, any range as to how much it could go up? Because some meters are $12 an hour. So if a car parks there for 2 hours, and if we also are allowing them, and there's incentives for them to park at meters, 2 ways, as you'd mentioned, if there was a lunch break or a lunch stop, I'm concerned that maybe this may be putting prices up for some people who never park at meters and making it less accessible to some people who want to car share. Sorry. I understand what we're trying to achieve. I also understand that it could exclude people from the membership cost.
No, I appreciate the question. Thank you. Clearly it's part of the business model of the different car share companies, and so we're not privy to that. What we do know is that they feel that the added advantage definitely outweighs the incremental cost, and so I'm assuming within their business model, they've looked at how many new people does that bring into the mix, and I don't think that they would be supportive of this if they felt that it was going to create a barrier economically for members. They're looking at more members coming in as a result.
And Mr. Dobrevoni, I'm glad you're standing up because I have a question to ask you also. And that was about the no park zones from 3 to 6, or now 3 to 7 for many of them. So let's say a car share car parks there, unknowingly thinking, okay, I can park my car here at the meter, but it's 3 p.m. and the city's running around ticketing people who are in those lanes, as rightfully we should be, because we want to make sure we clear that traffic or we clear those parked vehicles for the rush hour. What happens at that point? Is there a fine, and then who pays the fine? The car share company, but then would they put that fine specifically onto that individual who parked the car there or not? And are we concerned that there's going to be an education issue, making sure that people understand that they can't park in those areas because it's costly for us to get people down there to give those tickets out anyways, and I understand it's cost recovery, but it's just an inconvenience for those that can't drive down there right at 3 p.m.
Yeah, no, we certainly enforce the no stopping areas during the rush regulations. It is a safety factor, as if a car is illegally parked in that curb lane and people are having to pull out around them, it dramatically increases, risk of accident. And if a car share vehicle is parked in a rush regulated area, it would be ticketed and towed just like any other vehicle anywhere in the city.
And the individual would
And the
pay for that?
individual would be
Okay.
fined. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, same as happens today for a car
I'm
share
out of
vehicle.
time, but I will probably email you some more questions about this because I'm very interested.
Perfect. Perfectly on time. Thank you, Councillor DeGenova. Councillor Carr, where are you on here? Here you are. Please go ahead.
Yep, thanks, Madam Chair. So I'm interested in knowing how whether we've analyzed the long-term growth potential of car sharing in the city. Like, this is a tool to increase it, but do we have a sense of where it's headed in terms of the sector of transportation, and whether or not also it'll be impacted by autonomous vehicles?
Thank you to the chair. My name is Chris Darwin, also in the parking management branch with Alena. And so for that question, Vancouver really is sort of a leader in car sharing in North America and the world. And so if you look at our sort of growth in the car share membership, we have seen that flatten out over the last couple of years. So, we saw some tremendous growth from 2013 to 2014, 2015, but we're tapering off now at a very impressive, 34% of adults in Vancouver are car share members. This initiative here is partly to sort of push past that little bump there and encourage even more car sharing. And so, if this makes it more attractive and more available for everyone's everyday use, we're hoping we can push that even further.
And what's the main demographic? Do we know that for car share?
So for car sharing, I'd have to recall some Van City survey data that put out in 2017. Definitely, it is in the more younger range. But it depends on which type of car sharing it is as well. So on the one-way, we'll see that more on the younger range, whereas with the two-way, it's a wider gamut.
I'll just add, in terms of the demographic, we also know some statistics is that members of car shares are less likely to own a vehicle, drive less, and more likely to use a variety of ways of getting around the city. And so that's part of the whole package in terms of why we support it from a transportation policy, is being members of several car share companies gives them many options to get around without owning a vehicle.
Right. So as more youth enter the, age of 16, there's more potential in the growth.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. And do we know at all if the people who do generally have car share memberships are transit drivers, or are they cyclists, or are they walkers, or all three?
I mean, what I would say is that we're certainly moving to multimodal mobility, and that is the model, so that they are able to walk one way or ride their bike one way, and all of a sudden it starts pouring rain, so they can switch and take transit home or take a car share vehicle home, take a car share vehicle too, and take a taxi or transit home. And so we're seeing, and that's part of our transportation goals, is to provide a multimodal city that has many, many different options for people to get around that don't require a major investment in a vehicle.
Maybe through the citywide plan, we'll learn more about what their preferences are in terms of other.
Absolutely. I mean, a vehicle is the second largest investment that most families make, and it's by far the fastest depreciating investment in your asset mix. And so that's our goal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Dominato, up to 5 minutes for questions of staff. Go ahead.
IA partnership, and I'm just wondering if it outlined that they were generally supportive, but there were some concerns and feedback, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what that was. Thanks.
Got the two extremes here for the podium. The motor will be burned out shortly.
Sorry, I didn't wear my platform shoes today. So we did meet with the the BIA partnerships. Generally, they were supportive. Like we listed and like we've already spoken about, one of the concerns was about vehicles being stopped in the rush regulation areas. And so we've responded about the ticketing towing that would happen if that did occur. The other concern was about vehicles not turning over quickly and them being occupying those metered spaces for long periods of time. What has been found in Seattle is that the car shares actually turn over faster than a regular vehicle. For example, if you parked your car, your own private vehicle, and you're going for lunch, and then you go pick up some groceries, it might take you the full 2 hours that you're parked at a meter. Whereas a car sharing vehicle, it parks, you go off and do whatever you're doing, but another member might come and take that car, and it could be gone in 30 minutes. So we do see that the turnover is quicker for the car sharing vehicles compared to a regular vehicle.
And so that was just generally the feedback that you heard?
Correct, yeah.
Just two more questions. Just with respect to the metered parking areas, I think the briefing note says there's 11,000 metered spaces. How many spaces are we talking about that would be allocated overall to support car share?
In terms of the reserved parking?
Yeah.
That would be up to the car share organizations if they wish to partake in that. So we've limited it at 50 spaces per car share organization. So if all four were to decide to go that way for zero emission vehicles, so that would be 200 spaces per year. And that would only be for a 5-year period.
Okay, thank you. And then just around the financial implications, just curious if you could expand on what we would see in terms of net gain or loss in terms of, because I know we obviously rely on the metered parking for revenue. Mm-hmm. If you could just expand a bit on that and what we anticipate seeing with this.
Yeah, certainly we have forecasted a net gain from these policies as a whole. I think some of them, are not as lucrative. So giving away free permits, there's no additional revenue there, of course. But at the same time, with the parking at meters, we've able to have a sort of a rough level forecast of, how many vehicle trips are ending in proximity of meters today, and how many would be choosing to end at those meters in the future. So that's where we're able to estimate what that demand may be. I mean, ultimately, there is some unknowns on how the car share companies will want to roll this out themselves. If they wanted to offer it to all meters, but not certain areas that are more expensive, that might be one option that they choose to do. And so that would have an impact on the total amount of revenue coming in.
Okay. So basically what we're anticipating is that with those car share companies getting those permits, that it would offset where we're saying there'd be no costs for the zero emission car share vehicles.
Right. And Jerry just reminded me here, I had to pull it out, but it's about, we're estimating in the range of about 150 to 250,000 per month in additional revenue from this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. Councillor Bly, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. A number of my questions have been answered, but I wonder, as we're sort of stretching the context around car shares and the climate action motion and the 6 big moves, has there ever been an appetite for car share vehicles being allowed to travel in bus lanes during peak hours? Something that I, certainly with West East 12th closed at the moment, yes. We're seeing a lot of traffic on Broadway.
Yeah, I don't believe we have. One of the active discussions and debates that's going on now is the impact of taxis in the bus lanes, and so the more vehicles that are in the either bus lane or high occupancy vehicle lane, the less effective they are, and so there are some concerns about having too many vehicles there during rush hour periods. But we have not. The short answer to your question is no. We haven't had a discussion about car share vehicles being allowed to use the lane by way of being a car share vehicle.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, I wasn't aware taxis are allowed to use the bus lanes during peak hours.
Yes, and it's quite an active discussion point for us now in terms of impacts for transit use, because it does have an impact on transit use, and yet the taxis are a valuable part of the transportation network, and so we have a limited amount of road space, and so we're constantly making decisions about how to allocate that space.
Okay. And then the final one is, does the city have any say or input in terms of where car share spaces are allocated in parkades in the downtown core? I mean, I notice most of them often are on the very top level of sort of an 8-level parkade, and I wonder, do we ever weigh in? Do we see an opportunity there? I'm not saying it's problematic, but clearly it's pretty high up there when you've got many levels of parkade that are not being used, and then people using car share have to go to the very top of the parkade to access.
Yes, no, you're touching on several interesting points of discussion. So the car share companies pay for space, and so whether it's at meters or in parkades, and so the worse the access is, the cheaper the space. The better the access, the more expensive the space is. So when you're seeing them on the upper levels, that's because they're getting a deal, because they're spaces that are less in demand. And we are having active discussions about providing premium space for whether it's electric vehicles or for that. And so right now, there's also a premium price. So the city's parkades are managed by Easy Park. And so you're asking if we have say. So we have say through Easy Park. We work with Easy Park as the operator, and they provide incentives or opportunities. But that's the reason why they're up high, is because it's less expensive. And it would cost us more to subsidize if we're bringing them into the prime locations. However, if we wanted to push harder for an incentive, that would be the reason why we would do it. But we haven't, up until this point, felt it was necessary in terms of bringing them into the lower level and in competition with handicap parking and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know that there's it's just interesting, the two extremes, premium parking and then sort of non-premium parking. And I just am curious about, so my final question is, what does the report back look like on this particular, say that this moves forward as laid out, what would be the report back schedule in terms of us looking at how it's going, what we've learned?
Okay, we're intending, I mean, we would, if there were some problems with it, we would come back very quickly with a memo. Otherwise, the climate emergency report back is an opportunity to give a check-in, and then we would continue through memos, give an update if there's changes. I should just say on the premium spot, electric car share vehicles could then qualify for the prime spot. So maybe that might be where we split the difference between being on the top floor in the rain versus the prime spot on the ground floor.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a couple questions myself, not seeing any other councillors on the queue. And my first question really relates to understanding the logistics of how it actually works. So, for example, the free stopovers at the meters, how does that actually happen? Do I, as the renter for the car share, am I given the meter number to plug that in, or how are we tracking that in terms of billing that usage back or knowing that that is a car share vehicle parked in that spot? I'm just curious as to what that experience is like for the user experience, or how the city is able to allocate that cost back to the car share company.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So right now, each car share vehicle is very visible, and we issue a permit to it. And so we're easily, on enforcement side, easy to identify that it is a car sharing vehicle. But the actual mechanism that we would actually charge back with would be an agreement with each car share company, where they supply their GPS data where their vehicles had stopped, and then we can bill back at a later date. So, for example, if a car ends at a meter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and stays there for 1.5 hours, that will be reported to us, and then we can calculate after the fact for that car, okay, that was an hour and a half at this rate, and that would be included in the bill to them.
So as the car share user, I don't have to do anything, but for the relationship between the city and the car company, we rely on the honor system, or we would have an agreement with them that requires them to provide that GPS data?
Yep. We will have an agreement with them that requires it. So before this can actually happen, that agreement has to be in place. With the fees themselves, is set in bylaw by council, so that is set. You must pay sort of what is actually at the meter per the bylaw. And there is also an opportunity for us to audit that as well, because we often do, or we do quarterly occupancy checks throughout the city, and we're able to record, is each car share vehicle, are they there? and we can actually match that back to the data that we received to make sure that we're getting everything reported to us.
So same process for the up to 2 hours free stopover or the drop in terms of the 1 meter or the one-way trips.
So for the 2 hours free stopover, that's something that we can enforce through sort of time limits through chalking tires if there is an issue with it. For the two-way car share and the free 2 hours stopover, the one difference there is as opposed to the one-way is the user is paying for that vehicle the entire time, and so they have an incentive themselves. Okay, I better get back to that vehicle because I'm paying for the vehicle to be there.
Okay, so for the clarification question, so if it's enforced through normal parking enforcement, are they issued a different decal or something that indicates that that vehicle is different? It's one of the 50 that I, as a car share company, might choose to buy versus the other vehicles I have in my fleet? I'm really just trying to understand the mechanics of how that would work.
Yeah, so maybe to be clear, this is for the one-way car. If I went back through the sort of list of things, there's the one-way car share companies who can leave the vehicles at the meter, and that data is sent to us after the fact, and that's how we charge them there. For the two-way car sharing, so even for internal combustion car sharing, they marked with two-way car sharing insignia on the side. Plus, the permit itself will indicate that it's a two-way car share. They themselves are allowed to park for 2 hours for free at the meter, and if they exceed that 2 hours, they'd be subject to a ticket through regular enforcement practices.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then follow-up quick question is, following up on Councillor DeGenova's earlier question, I had the same one around whether that cost would be passed on. And so in that 2020 fall report back as part of the climate update, would that information conceivably be contained in some of that as to what the car share rates are today and what they were a year later for the companies that chose to participate in this?
Yes, absolutely. I think each individual car share company will for sure give us that feedback as we're going along, and we'll be able to observe that ourselves. Okay,
I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, Council, if there are no other questions of staff at this time, we do have speakers on this item first, so I'd like to call our speakers, and our first speaker today is Sylvain Solaire. And if I can ask you to speak into the microphone, and you have up to 3 minutes to provide your comments to Council.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, Member of Council, good afternoon. My name is Sylvain Solaire. I'm the Director of Business Development for Modo Cooperative. And on behalf of Modo, I would like to express our support of the recommendations made in the report. We are pleased by the approach taken by staff and the clear distinction made between the two types of car sharing services. One way, which is often described as a drive-it-yourself taxi service, and round-trip car sharing, which is the service offered by Modo, where the members have to pick up and return the vehicle at the same location, which is a set location. It doesn't change. The distinction really helps ensure that the benefits of each service is maximized while mitigating potential negative impacts for the members and for the community at large as well. Allowing car share vehicles in use, which are booked and paid by the members during the time they're using, free stopovers at meter parking spaces for a maximum of 2 hours. I don't remember if it's recommendation number 2. Would make it more affordable and convenient for people to choose shared vehicles over individual ones, because when they're going to use such vehicle, they're going to pay for their rental, for the rental of the vehicle. They're not going to pay for the parking up to 2 hours. They will take it, let's say they take it on the parking here, the City Hall. They will drive downtown for 30 minutes, park at the meter, and then come back, drop it here. They will not pay for the 30 minutes of the meter, but they will pay for the entire duration of the booking. So we're not going to pass extra costs to these members in order to really have a service that is as affordable as possible. And affordability is the number one reason for people to join Modo, followed by convenience and lifestyle. I will say that we are sharing our annual member survey with staff, and I'm sure that they would be able to make this information available to you. It will give you information on the reason why people are using the service, how they're using the service, their transportation mix, demographics, and our membership looks exactly like the Vancouver population. So that being said, having more people and businesses use a service like Modo is not an end in and out of itself. It's a way to create a more vibrant and sustainable community. 3/4 of Modo members do not own a vehicle, and they primarily rely on public transit, cycling, and walking to commute and move around the city. And this is where we are making a significant impact. Modo is also extremely pleased to see the recommendation that zero-emission car share vehicles be charged a reduced rate for reserved parking spaces. So that would be, in our case, parking space where there would be a Modo vehicle available for people to pick up and then drop off.
Mr. Soler, you are close to time, so if you just want to conclude, that would be terrific. Thanks.
Yes. So reducing parking-related costs would help us accelerate the transition to zero-emission vehicles, which are currently more expensive to acquire. The move would align nicely with the CDE ecosystem strategy, and we encourage Council to vote in favor of the recommendation presented by staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I can ask you to stay there, you do have questions from some councillors, and Councillor Carr is up first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Soler. And I appreciate you've already anticipated some of my questions, so you've answered them, but there's a few others. I'm very interested in that survey that you've talked about and hope that that is shared back with us. I think it would be instructive for our whole transportation planning. But I'm interested in if you did test not just what other modes of transportation are used, but if there's a preference, i.e. if Modo car share users if they're more popular, the most popular alternative is transit or cycling or walking, if you know that.
Yeah, we do know that. We know that in percentage by type of, by gender and age. We know this by municipality. So you could also compare how you're doing compared to Victoria or Burnaby or New West or Surrey. I think that, and you say, alternative modes. Modo is an alternative mode to walking, cycling, or taking public transit. They really do not drive much. And we can also provide some information on that. I think that in Vancouver, people primarily cycle. And then second comes public transit and third walking. But I may be wrong, and staff will be able to share the information with you.
That's interesting to me, because you also relayed that in general the demographics of Modo members matches Vancouver.
Correct.
So, but I see cycling as not being so equitably distributed as a mode of transportation amongst different demographics. So I will be interested in seeing that information, and I really thank you for sharing it and for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr. And next you have questions from Councillor DeGenova.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked our staff. I'm just wondering if you might have any estimate as to what the end cost to the user is going to be, looking at, I suppose, how many cars you would anticipate or expect would be parking in meters, looking at the different rates of those meters. Some, I understand, for only a couple of dollars. Some go up to $12 or $16 an hour. Will those costs be passed down, I understand from our staff, not specifically to the users who use the meters? I would assume it would be your membership overall. So is that the case? And if so, have you done any research as to what you expect that would cost each end user?
Yeah. So Modo will not be one of the car share operators impacted by the recommendation and the potential policy that would allow one-way car share vehicles to end their trip at the meter. None of our vehicles would end their trip at the meter. And what the recommendation number 2, I believe, would allow us to do is to stop for maximum 2 hours while the vehicle is being rented by a member. And this, as I understand the report, would be free of charge for the car share operator. So we would not pass a cost to the user because the city wouldn't charge us anything. Now, what would be the impact, if I may answer, for the one-way operators? I can stop here if you want me to clarify anything, but I think that what the one-way operators will do, because they will they will be charged for the time that they're paying between bookings. What they will do is that they will downsize their parking supply in parkades. So now instead of renting 50 parking spots at a nearby parkade, they will only rent 30, and they will save on parking costs there while paying more for on-street parking. So I think that they will balance.
I'm sorry, I only get a certain amount of time. So you're saying to me, and I will ask through a point of information or clarify or ask a question of clarification, is that a stop of 2 hours with a motor car at a meter, and it wouldn't, obviously you wouldn't start your trip at the meter.
No.
Either, because you'd have to end your trip at the meter. So there would be a period of time that Moto wouldn't pay anything to the city, but would be sitting at a metered spot.
That is correct.
Okay, I'll be asking our staff to follow up on that and what it's going to look like for our parking revenues. Thanks. Later on. But thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Councillor DiGenova. And Mr. Solera, I have one question for you before you run away. And that's really about recommendation number 4, and in case you don't have it in front of you, really talks about allowing for metered parking spaces to be reserved for the use of car-sharing vehicles at a cost of 66% of potential revenue. And the report notes that no spaces wherever the car-sharing companies didn't actually take this up, apparently, previously, in reserving spaces, and I think that's the hope in offering the discount of 66%. Do you think that you're likely to do that based on the costs in the report? And they range depending on where they are in the city.
Yeah, when reading the report, what I understood is that no company ever rented one of the most expensive metered parking spaces. This is really cost prohibitive. But parking providers are currently renting some of the least expensive metered parking spaces, though it really excludes car share operators from certain areas where the meter it's $7-10+ an hour. What we are willing to explore, and we already made a soft commitment to staff, is that if the recommendation moves forward, we will be looking at 10 electric vehicles that would be placed in very desirable locations. And we would be able to do this by having lower parking fees. So yes, we really want to take you on the offer, not get to the 50,
right,
but we want to start and see how we can ramp up.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's all the questions that you have from council. Thank you for coming out today. Okay. And we do have one more speaker, Drake Eidson. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Eidson? Okay. So there's the microphone. You have a timer to your right and up to 3 minutes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, councilors. Thank you for hearing public comment today. My name is Drake Edson. I'm the Fleet Operations Manager for Zipcar Vancouver. Zipcar is the world's leading car-sharing company with over 1 million members across 500 cities and towns worldwide. The city's asked us to speak today, and we're excited about the opportunity to lend our 20 years of expertise to the discussion. I'd like to take a moment to briefly talk about some of the tangible benefits of Zipcar's round-trip car-sharing model. So as was noted on page 3 of the staff report for this item, round-trip car sharing offers more pronounced benefits than one-way car sharing with respect to reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, kilometers traveled per trip, as well as parking demand reduction. So for these reasons, Zipcar exclusively operates a round-trip model in North America. In 2018, we commissioned a municipal and environmental impact report. I have copies with me if you want to thumb through it. It can also be found online at zipcar.com/impact. And that actually answers a lot of the questions that I've heard in the hearing so far today. I'd like to take just a moment to share a couple of my favorite statistics from the report, again, that answer some of the questions that I've heard. First up, we found that each round-trip Zipcar can remove up to 13 personally owned cars from the road. This frees up valuable curb space and helps with parking congestion in some of the most crowded residential areas of the city, such as the West End or Mount Pleasant. 65% of Vancouver Zipcar members do not own a car, and 54% of Vancouver Zipcar members got rid of a personal vehicle after joining our service. Heard another question about public transit, and it's great because Zipcar membership is shown to complement public transit use rather than take away from it, as 54% of Vancouver members take public transit more than 5 times a week, and 60% of Vancouver members typically purchase a monthly transit pass. Finally, Zip trips are naturally shared rides, which means larger car pools and less emissions. 68% of Vancouver Zip trips have at least 2 people in the vehicle. Again, we're very grateful for the opportunity to speak today and for the city's continued commitment to car sharing as a means to reduce dependence on personally owned vehicles. We strongly support the recommendations of the staff report, specifically the one providing 2 hours of free parking at all parking meters during active car sharing reservations, and really believe that it will improve the Zipcar member experience and is a great amenity and another way to encourage more Vancouverites to live car light.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eidson. You are under time. Always appreciated. And now it's more time for questions. You have questions from Councillor Carr.
Great, thank you. You answered most of my questions, which is
Fantastic.
awesome. So I just have one.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is, what is your projection into the future, especially given the potential rise of autonomous vehicles? What's your projection into the future of car sharing?
I think that car sharing is really helpful for larger areas, for large cities. It, as I mentioned, it drastically reduces the number of personally owned vehicles on the road. In terms of autonomous vehicles, I don't have a report handy that has a lot of information about that. It is something that certainly our home office is looking into exploring. I think as that technology improves, it's certainly something that we will look at closer, and who knows, down the line would love to adopt something like that as well, especially with electric car sharing, electric vehicles as well. We don't currently have any in our fleet, but I know that that's on the table and something that's being analyzed. Car sharing is great because specifically the round trip model that we operate, we're able to have vehicles in very strategic places, specifically residential areas, where large groups of members can all use the same vehicle without needing to purchase one for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your information, too.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Okay, thank you, Mr. Eidson. Appreciate that.
Everyone.
So that does conclude hearing from speakers. Do I have Councillor Light to move the motion? And I saw a hand, Councillor DiGenova. Just a moment. Let me just put your microphone on.
Thank you very much. And I've just sent in an amendment to the clerk.
Okay.
So the amendment would be a part of the recommendations that would be moved with the motion. Get it? If there's any quick grammatical changes, if you could make those for me. I was hoping, as I'm going to move this with amended language, so this would be the motion. I'd like to ask a point of information through you to staff, if possible. It was my understanding, and I clearly heard staff say, that during the time that the vehicle was in the space, even if it was a stopover, that the car share company would be paying for that metered space. I'm now hearing from from a representative of Moto that that's not the case. I was hoping that that question could be answered by staff to see whether or not this amendment is necessary. And well, I've asked staff to fix that amendment up because it was coming.
Sure. Why don't we go to the point of information first, since I don't think council has the amendment. I give clerk a chance to bring that up. And Mr. Dubrovny, do you want to address that?
Sure. So the rules are slightly different for one-way car share versus two-way car share. And the words that we used in the report was actively rented. So if it's a one-way car share trip that drops, the vehicle, that's the end of the rental, and they leave, then they are charged, the car share company is charged for the parking, and they would pay the city. If it's a two-way car share trip and they leave the vehicle at a meter, it's still actively rented because they need to return that vehicle back to its original spot. So for the Zipcar or for the Moto, because it's actively rented, we would not charge the meter rate, but the user is being charged because the vehicle is still under the rental. And that's why we're thinking that time will be kept quite short, because they've rented the vehicle, they've gone down, they've left it at a meter, but they're still renting the vehicle, so it'll be quite short to get back in the vehicle and return it and end the trip.
But I hear that could be up to 2 hours, and at some meters, 3 hours, and at some meters, it's $12 to $16 an hour. So
and $9 is our maximum.
Oh, sorry, no, really? I thought downtown it was more.
$9.
Perhaps not. Another point of information, just to follow up to that, would be I had heard specifically that the car share company would be covering that time. So that would
So for
not
the-
be. And then what would our lost revenues be on that potentially?
So in total, we're expecting that this would generate on the order of $2 million of additional revenue for the city over the year. So the numbers we have in the report have $150,000 to $250,000 per month of additional revenue. And then for those meters where we're not charging, we're expecting we might be losing on the order of $20,000 to $30,000 per month. So in total, it's an increase of revenue for the city on the order of $2 million per year. And that's the dollar value.
So I'm inclined to move the motion with the amended language. And my apologies for just trying to type it out so quickly. I had kind of heard two differing answers, but I really do appreciate Mr. Dobrovoni clarifying that. And I feel that the reason I had questions on this was I was concerned that I didn't have the full picture and information as to whether or not the metered space would be paid for completely during the full time. I had thought that it was, and I do think that it should be paid for. I'm also concerned with our budget, council, that we have revenues that we need to maintain, and losing revenues at this time. As the chair of finance, I'm quite concerned about that. So for that reason, I think that it's great that we're allowing car share vehicles to be at these meters, but I do feel that the time should be paid for by the car share company. If they're going to be dinging or charging users on one side for some of this, I think that they should charge their users for the full extent, or they shouldn't charge their users, or we should be looking at different models. But I'm hoping that the amended language to the motion passed will be successful. I also think that revisiting this as per Councillor, or as per the chair's comments and questions later on after this has been implemented might be helpful, but very concerned to not be charging right now and losing that amount of revenue for parking in our city.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor DeGenova. So I just want to recap for Council where we are procedurally. So we do have an amended motion, which is now on the floor. Do we have a seconder? The amended motion? Councillor Dominato? I believe a point of order trumps. Councillor Carr.
Madam Chair, I would like your ruling on whether this is in order or not, on the basis that this included language is in order, given that it fundamentally changes the basic premises of what this report is suggesting. In other words, it's not just tweaking it; it's actually fundamentally changing the intent.
I could certainly take a moment to confer with the clerk, but my instinct would be that Councillor.
Point of order.
Sorry, I'm just going to finish this one first. My instinct would be that any councillor is free to move a motion with an amendment, and they've done that. And there is a process if council would like to amend further on to change that. But I'm not sure that it speaks to it. Although I see our city manager jumping up to contribute.
Thank you. Through the chair. I have concerns with tampering with the foundation of this report, and if this is the direction council goes, I'd recommend that you refer it back to staff and let us do the analysis to really come back to you with the implications of making a significant change like this on the floor. We've spent working on this report for a year. We've been engaging with the companies. If you're going to make a significant change on the floor regarding pricing and whatnot, I would recommend that you just refer the report back to staff and we can report back on that.
I'll say that is an option, and I'll go over to Councillor Genova's point of order and maybe ask you also, and when you ask your question, to consider whether or not you'd like to move the report without and do it as a separate amendment for Council's consideration. But what's your point of order?
Thank you. I would actually like to call for a recess. But my point of order specifically is I believe that it was said to me that the full cost of the time incurred at the space would be covered. That's what I see in the report. I don't see anything saying otherwise. I did hear something other than that from the speaker. I'm also hearing, I did ask originally if there would be any, I was asking my questions to see if there would be any lost revenues. It's just been confirmed for me now that there will be lost revenue. So I would hope for $20,000 to $30,000 a month that council might actually consider a 5-minute recess. So I'd like to move a 5-minute recess to concur with staff on
I'm happy
this.
to move a recess. I would note for council, I do believe in the body of the report, it does reference the lost revenue of 20,000, but it also references the potential upside. So I think that is in the body of the report, but I think it would be efficient to take a recess to confer with the clerk.
Yeah.
So if council are in agreement, do I have a show of hands in favor of a 5-minute recess? 4, 5. Okay, so that passes. We'll take a short recess. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience. So after conferring with the clerk, if an amendment is deemed to have a significant impact on the recommendations in the report, their advice is that it's ruled out of order. So I'm going to offer Councillor DiGenova the opportunity to withdraw at this time that proposed amendment, if you'd like to do that. Sure, one moment. Go ahead.
Great, my timer started. Okay. I'm happy to withdraw this amendment, although I had put it forward because I was concerned about some of the numbers. And I understand we don't have the numbers, so I'm hoping the council will support me, as I know I need unanimous consent of council to withdraw an amendment. So I'd like to withdraw the amendment, and then I'll move forward with.
Okay. So Councillor DiGenova is withdrawing the amendment, which does require, just for clarification for everybody, the unanimous consent of council. Do we have unanimous consent? Can I do that by show of hands for her withdrawal? Yes? Okay, great. So that is on the floor. You still have the floor, Councillor
So
DiGenova.
I would like to, now I'd need to move the motion again with an amendment.
Okay.
And I have spoken with staff about this, but just because I do understand that there are some revenues that this will support, it also will be a loss in parking revenue specifically. I'm hoping to include an added letter and recommendation in the recommendations, or an added letter to the recommendations in the motion that I'm moving, that would ask staff that would direct staff to report back to us with any financial implications of the recommendations in 1 year, which I understand to have been the recommendation of staff when I had asked the time frame.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor DiGenova. So we now have an amended recommendations on the floor with the amendment made by Councillor DiGenova. Do we have a seconder? I'm sorry, Councillor Carr, we're seconding the motion as amended with this one. Okay, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but I'm asking right now if we have a seconder for Councillor Dominato. Thank you. So we now have this on the floor. So now it's open to members to move forward. If you have no further comments, Councillor DiGenova.
I just would, considering some of the answers to the questions that I received, and I appreciate staff's clarification on this, but in listening to the original comments and reading the report, and whenever we're talking about revenues, as I get asked many questions, as many of you may, council, meters used to only go until 8 p.m. They now go until 10 p.m. So when we ask, when we're asked by the public as to why some individuals don't need to pay the meter and others do, I like to have that information. I also understand that it's difficult to measure something where we haven't been through, a year of it yet, or a substantial amount of time, because this hasn't happened for those car share companies to be able to report back to us exactly how much time their vehicles have spent at meters. So for that reason, this would offer me some comfort in knowing that those numbers will be brought back at that time. Thank you.
Councillor DiGenova. I now have Councillor Fry next, so I'm going to advance. I just want to confirm, actually, I have Councillor Wiebe here, so I'm going to advance Councillor Wiebe. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be asking to sever. In Part A, it talks about the council direct staff to report back on the initial outcomes of these car sharing parking policy changes in the fall of 2020, and I think that gives enough time to really understand how this works, what the financial implications were, what the intake was, and so I think that I look forward to that report, and I will be voting against a new recommendation.
Okay. Do you have any further comments at this time, Councillor Wiebe, on the motion overall? No, you're good? Great. Okay. Councillor Bly.
I can support this amendment, and I find it that it is already in the report. Oh, sorry, standing. I'm just curious about why this amendment is coming forward as written when it's in the report that this is happening. So I really appreciate the intent. I'm just a little confused, and so to be able to vote, and also I think as a council we're really trying to become more efficient and work together. And I know that that is not the intent of this amendment, but I must say that after a number of conversations about ways that we can tighten up procedurally, I'm struggling to support this amendment, and I very much appreciate your due diligence, Councillor DiGenova, to bring this amendment forward. But we have to be really careful when redundancy is delaying process. And I find it happens right around council chambers often. And so I don't not support this, but I'm struggling to continuously support redundancy as a point of just bringing that forward. So those are my thoughts. I'm not sure how I will vote.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, Mr. Dobrovoni has already said that the financial implications of these recommendations are that we'll make $2 million a year. So I don't see why we need C. And if it's severed, I'll vote against C and for the rest of it.
Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Fry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just like to thank staff for this work and thank the speakers and really just acknowledge that this is really a big game changer, and this is some pretty amazing stuff that we're doing here in the City of Vancouver, leading the way with car sharing and this multimodal kind of stuff, and it's actually really exciting. I appreciate Councillor Wiebe adding the intent to sever. I can't support C. This is completely redundant, and in fact, the staff are coming back with a report back in fall, and then a second report back is anticipated for this, I guess, for July. So the summer of next year seems like just adding an extra burden to staff. And we are trying to do things a little bit better. And I really appreciate that we're all new at this and we're struggling through how we're going to manage this kind of stuff. But this just seems superfluous and redundant. So.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor DiGenova, let me put your microphone on. You have a point of order?
Under Section 5.2 of the procedural bylaw, I feel that I am being unfairly called out, specifically being told that the amendment that I've brought forward in the now main motion would unfairly burden staff when any piece of work that any councillor brings forward, amendment may unfairly burden staff. And I don't see anything about them reporting back on the financial implications. They would have to go to the car share companies to get that information. Outcomes could be that it was positive, it was negative. I would like it ruled on as to whether or not I personally, in putting forward an amendment, if I am burdening staff beyond how other council members burden staff with their motions. Thank you.
I think I'm clear on the question, and I think I can rule on that quite quickly. I think that the spirit of the 5.2 and the procedure bylaw really relates to personally impugning councillors or councillors' motives, and I think that in this case, Councillor Fry was speaking to his perspective on the substance of the motion and the fact in terms of content, so I don't think he was casting aspersion individually. I think he was simply stating his opinion that he didn't view that amendment in the same way. So I'm going to rule against that point of order and continue with the debate. Would you have any further comments at this time?
No, I appreciate your ruling and consideration there, Chair. And yeah, I do. I just want to again reflect that I'm really happy with this work that staff have done and the fact that there are financial considerations that are included in this report already. And I'm assuming that the report back that we were expecting in fall of 2020 will similarly include those kind of financial perspectives so that we're getting a fulsome picture and not just about climate change, but about what it means to our financial bottom line. So really appreciate all the work. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Carr, you have the floor.
Yes, actually, I'd like to rise first on a point of order.
By all means.
Thank you. My point of order, Madam Chair, is to again ask you to rule whether or not C is in order. And I'm going to refer you to section 4.3 of the procedure bylaw, specifically subsection F. And the intent of subsection F is to say that if a matter is, specifically I'll use the word because it's got a list of them, dilatory, incorrect, frivolous, or rude. The word frivolous, actually chairs of our meetings, the two standing committees and the mayor, did meet with staff, and they outlined for us that the meaning of that word frivolous is that something is being put forward which is redundant. In other words, it's already ongoing. And my request is that you rule based on the fact that this report already has a report back, and that report and the manager of engineering has already said that will include costs, and that the report itself already references costs related to these suggested changes.
Point of order.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Just a moment. I'm going to stop your timer. Councillor DeGenova?
You'd have to rule on her point of order, but I do believe that
with one point of order.
if you need advice from the clerk, we should take a recess. I don't think that another council member should be giving you advice from the clerk. Thank you.
Actually, I don't think that's what was happening here. I think Councillor Carr was asking her point of order, and I was just as you jumped in there, just about to actually suggest that I just take a moment to confer with the clerk. I'm not going to call a recess. I'm just going to take a moment with the goodwill of council. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience on this one. And I know we are striving towards being more efficient with our meetings and having some integrity around our points of order. I will note that as it relates to the question, point of order raised by Councillor Carr in section 4.3F of the procedure bylaw that the mayor had referenced yesterday, and I would also like to emphasize that the word frivolous does not convey perhaps the common sense of the language. It really relates more to whether something is germane or already covered in, or it's potentially another way of saying is, I think already covered is a good way of putting it in the report, and I would suggest that it is, because there is a fair amount of information in this report about the projected impact on costs, and I think that staff have heard the discussion and would intend to bring that back as part of the report back, so I am going to rule in favor of that point of order at this point. So thank you to council on that one. Do you have anything else, Councillor Carr?
I do. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, let me just start your timer again. Just a second, I'm going to stop Councillor Carr's timer, and go ahead, Councillor DeGenova.
I just wanted to make sure that that would mean that the motion was still moved, but then it would just be moved without the added letter. Because I did intend to move the recommendations in the motion, so I just want to make sure that you're ruling out of order specifically on that, because if not, then you're ruling all of the recommendations out of order, and we can't come back to them under Robert's rules. And I would just suggest that maybe we caution ourselves from that, because once you've ruled on that, if you rule it all out of order, then that rules staff recommendations out of order.
So I appreciate the clarification question. It's a good one, and I know that you, with your significant experience as chair, it's important to apply these things equally. So I interpret Councillor Carr's point of order as being specific to that clause, and I think that was the question that was asked. And so therefore my ruling is that that specific clause, which is now on the floor, is out of order. So
I'm glad that was helpful. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Carr, back to you. You still do have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to stand in support of the motion and the recommendations by staff. I'm very excited about any efforts we make that actually move us closer to meeting our obligations to mitigate climate change and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and actually improve quality of life for the people here. I have a number of people who have relayed to me how much they love car sharing. It really does relieve the burden of owning a vehicle. It complements their other modes of transportation. And I am very appreciative of the fact that there is an actual estimated GHG reduction projection. This is a new thing in our reports, and that's the way we can add up to see if we are actually going to get to our target. So thank you for including those projections. I also thank you for including the costs. I know there's a big range because you're still projecting, but and we don't know what the uptake is going to be, but I appreciate very much the speakers coming to tell us enthusiastically about this mode of transportation, and I have a lot of high hopes, especially amongst the younger generation who seem to want to own cars way less than my generation did, and that's good for the planet, good for our city. So thanks all for working on this.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. You're under time. Well done. Councillor DeGenova, you have the floor.
Thank you. Now that I understand that all of the financial information will be included in outcomes, which it does not say, but that we're going to take broad language like outcomes to include financial information, environmental information, that will be redundant in any report because outcomes will include all of that. I intend to also use 4.3 to the greatest extent, as we've just seen. So I think that hopefully will move our meetings along more quickly, because I think it maybe could have even been used a little more yesterday, considering some of the amendments that came forward. That being said, I do support this cautiously, understanding that we, council, have received correspondence from people that are quite upset about the situation in the city of Vancouver, about having not only enough metered spots available to them, but especially for a community with accessibility issues and needs, disabled parking, looking at motorcycles also. And I applaud our staff for the great work that they have done on those matters, and I know that we're moving forward towards more. Maybe we'll even see more electric charging stations soon to complement the meters. That being said, I certainly do hear from many people that it can be challenging in neighborhoods and communities, on residential streets, even as a safety precaution, not to be parking a car share vehicle on a main road. So for public safety reasons as well, I certainly do support this. I will be looking closely at those financial implications because as chair of the Finance and City Services Committee, I think that it's important that we watch the budget as it comes to us. It's only a few months away, or as I like to count them in credit card payments away. And I think that we have to remember that council has lofty goals, that we put forward many motions, but I applaud our staff for the work that they've done on this. I'd like to thank the speakers for coming out meeting after meeting. Hours, you've spent hours here, if not days. So thank you very much for that, and I will be supporting the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor DiGenova. Councillor Dominato, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And just to start, thank you to our staff for the work that you've undertaken on this. I think that I was really struck by the data that was collected around that a third of Vancouverites have car share memberships in the city. And those include, there's people who actually, or maybe some of them have vehicles, some don't, but it is really contributes to sort of our multimodal approach to getting around the city. So I'm very supportive of the work that's been undertaken here around the car sharing parking policy and the fact that it supports our active transportation, mobility around the city, our multimodal lifestyle, but also the environmental impacts and positive impacts in terms of climate and change. So I just would like to say thanks for the work on this. Look forward to the report back and how it goes, recognizing that this is new territory for the City of Vancouver. But again, we're recognized as a leader in car share. And so thank you for the work on this, and happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. I'm going to take myself off and advance Councillor Bly first. 1 sec. Go ahead, Councillor Bly. Oh, I lost you 1 moment. I'll just turn on your microphone and get the clerk to start your timer. Go ahead.
Request again. There we go. Thank you very much. I just wanted to stand up also and speak and support the fact that this report has been worked on over the last year suggests that there's a lot of planning and thought that's gone into it, and also in anticipation that it's going to return to the city a lot of value in both getting people out of sort of single-use vehicles, if that's what we can call them, and into shared sort of economy around how to get from A to B. We know there's more and more families that are relying on car share as well as bikes and walking and buses, and I think this is a great step forward. To Mr. Dobrovony's point, it rains in the city unexpectedly. Maybe you have to get somewhere with groceries. It just offers a ton of flexibility, and I would say street parking is a big part of that. That there's a further incentive for people, and I think that no matter what we report back on in the next year, that the cost, we find a way to make sure that that cost doesn't hit the end user, because I feel very strongly that we ought to not disincentivize people to be using car share and find other ways to make sure that, but I'm hopeful that this will return as a revenue stream to the city, and we've asked for staff to think outside the box in ways for us to raise more funds that isn't just delivering higher taxes to our taxpayers. So I think this is all around hitting all of the markers, and I'm excited to support and looking forward to people talking about on the street how great it is that they can park at certain meters. And thank you for all the work, and that's it. Happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. And I'll take the opportunity to... By all means, do you want to stand, Councillor Hardwick?
I just wanted to point out that last night I made an amendment to a motion which I spoke to. And then when I wanted to make my summary comments at the end and I asked that my timer be reset, it was not. I was told I had 30 seconds. I just want to draw attention to the fact that Councillor DiGenova put forward amendments to the motions. We spent quite a bit of time on it, and then she was able to go back and have her timer reset to speak again in summation to the motion. So that's my point of parliamentary procedure. I'd like to know for the future if it, because in my view, I should have had my timer reset and been able to finish my concluding remarks last night. And so that is my point of parliamentary procedure, and I'd appreciate a response. I don't want to detract from this very positive motion, which I support, but I did want to draw attention to that.
Okay, so I appreciate that, Councillor Hardwick, and with your permission, I'd like to finish this item, and then I can confer with the clerk after and get back to you with an answer on that. Thank you. And while you have the floor, do you have any comments on this motion, or are you finished?
Only that I'm enthusiastically in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to make some closing comments myself. I wanted to thank staff for the report and the speakers for coming out on this one. I think that we need to trial things. I believe in carrot incentives as opposed to sticks, and I think hopefully people that are using car share will be excited in the same way that folks get to drive in the HOV lanes. I think it's viewed as a bit of a perk, and so if that can encourage people to use car share more and for the participating companies to adopt electric vehicles, I'm all for that. My sense is that this is a bit new ground. Well, it's actually using existing ground differently, but new ground in the sense that we don't really know what we don't know. And so we're going to need to be progressive in terms of adjusting as we go through this. And I think we saw that with the fact that staff saw that the companies were not picking up on the reserved meter spaces, and so are attempted to adjust that recommendation in this report. It'll be interesting to see how it works with the GPS data coming back and forth. So I'm hopeful that staff really heard those questions in discussion, and we'll be able to provide council with some good information back in a year, including on the revenue side, which I acknowledge was projected in the report as well. So I think we probably need a bit of time under our belt to really understand how that rolls out in terms of adoption and the information coming back. So having said that, I think if we can incentivize this mode of travel, it's a great thing. And if we can incentivize additional acquisition of electric vehicles, that is too. So I will be wholeheartedly supporting the report. Okay, so seeing no further councillors or comments on the queue, we will now proceed to take the vote. Would you still like to sever, Councillor Reid? No, we don't need to sever because we've ruled that clause out of order, so we don't have a, unless any councillor would like to sever the recommendation as it now stands. Seeing none, okay, so we will proceed to vote on the full recommendation. Okay, so that passes unanimously with none in opposition. Thank you, Council. Thank you, speakers, and thank you, staff, for that. That now concludes Administrative Report number 6 of our agenda. And we will now move on to Administrative Report number 7, which is titled Dissolution of the South Fraser Street Collective Parking Project. And as I mentioned earlier to Council staff, had not intended to present on this specific presentation, but they are prepared to provide a brief overview if that's the will of Council. Councillor DiGenova, you have a point of something?
I'd just like to, a point of something. No, actually,
just clarify.
I was standing, or I put myself on the queue to move to waive the presentation, and perhaps also questions of Council until after we hear from the speakers, considering there are quite a few speakers signed up that have been waiting. So I'm happy to move to hear from speakers first and have questions questions to staff after we hear from speakers.
Okay, so I'm going to deal with those two pieces separately with the will of Council. So just in respecting staff's time as well. So is it the will of Council to waive an overview by staff? Am I seeing anybody that has a burning desire to have an overview? No? Seeing none? Okay, do we have agreement from Council to proceed with speakers first? Can I have a show of hands? Anybody opposed? Look at that. Excellent. Okay, so we will now proceed with speakers. We have a number this evening, and our first speaker on the South Fraser Collective parking project is Roman Break. Break? Close? No cigar? You have 3 minutes to speak. There's a timer to your right, and feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you to the chair and to council. My name is Roman Brach. I'm here representing my parents' business, Super Spice House, and I am opposed to the recommendation in the report. I'm just going to go through a few items. I'm not prepared. I don't have any speech, just a few notes. First, the special assessment that is pays for this parking space right now. One of the things that I want to point out is this special assessment is assessed to landowners, not businesses. So removing this special assessment would not have any direct, immediate effect on the businesses. Most businesses have long leases. My parents' business has a 10-year lease. Their lease payments are going to go down because their landlord is going to receive this extra revenue. The report talks about the parking spaces being near capacity. My parents have owned that store for 10 years. I have visited there many, many, many times. Not once have I ever gone there and not been able to find a spot. So even though it may be near capacity, doesn't mean that it's full all the time and there's no parking available. The report also talks about input from the business association surrounding the area. And one of the key things that really disturbed me was in the report, it states after the bylaw is repealed that there will be a fulsome parking study. I've worked in municipal government for 11 years. That is backwards. The consultation with the businesses should happen before this is happening. And the BIA does not represent the entire businesses along that area. They mostly represent the business owners. This is the third time I've been here, or I took the day off work last week to speak about this, and heard a lot about the citywide plan that you guys are working on, which sounds like a great initiative. One of the things that I heard over and over again is that the community associations do not represent all the residents there. I would say the same thing about the business association here. They don't represent all the businesses, and I would ask that that consultation be done before you make any decisions. The other thing that struck me about this report is the petition was very minimized, and it was noted there that it's only one person that organized it. I've met Mr. Baines from sitting out here waiting for you guys for the opportunity to speak, and he's a real person, and he had organized this himself, and those petitions are real people that have come up and signed it. My parents only found out about this through Mr. Baines, not through the city, not through staff, and I would ask for anything to be done. If you're going to pass this, at least have the consultation before you make any decisions, and defer the motion until the consultation is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You do have questions, so I'll ask you to stay there, and you have a question first from Councillor DiGenova.
No, that was a holdover.
That was a holdover. Oh, my apologies. Okay, thank you for coming, and thank you for waiting. I know it can be long. We're trying to get a little tighter with our procedures. We appreciate that. Okay, so seeing no questions from Council Net Speaker, our second speaker is Rob Najjar. Mr. Najjar, I believe you are familiar, 3 minutes, and
yes.
Okay, fantastic. Go ahead.
Najjar. Thank you.
Najjar. I'm doing well on the names today. Go ahead.
My name is Rob Najjar. I'm from the Fraser Street BIA, and I am the executive director of the BIA. The board of the BIA is in support of this report. We have seen the city studies over the 2 years of traffic patterns, and we know, even before seeing the report, that the lots are 94 to 100% full throughout the business day. During the day, there are cars idling 5 to 6 cars deep, driving in circles, making U-turns, parking illegally because there's no availability. My office overlooks directly those parking lots, and I see it every day, mostly starting from around noon, going for several hours, 4 to 5 hours. The lots are 50% full, in my estimation, from the cars of employees, merchants, residents, and people taking the B line or the Fraser Street bus to downtown, leaving at most 50% of the lot for the customers. We believe parking meters will result in higher turnover of cars and more, not less, customers for our businesses. Yes, the merchants have been paying for these lots since 1959. Taxes per year have reached $400,000. We know we don't have a legal right over the lots, but engineering has recognized our unique relationship and have worked closely with us for over 2 years to understand and meet our needs. We have worked with engineering to implement this properly and have had discussions and agreements on issues such as parking rates, monthly parking, upgrade, and maintenance, making changes we requested from 30-minute time slots for parking to 15 minutes, monthly parking rates that are responsive to the district's needs. Just last week, engineering called us to say they have agreed to our request and understood our reasoning for changes to parking meters in the lots, and that from 6 p.m. onward, it would be free. The opposition to this, of course, is understandable. Nobody wants taxes. Nobody wants or asks the city to implement meters in their neighborhood. I'm sure it's never been done where business organizations call the city to ask for meters in the history of the city. Roughly 50% of the businesses signed this petition. However, the wording of the petition has to also be considered. Anyone would sign a petition if they are told the businesses would fail and if this is going to be complete destruction. I've gone business to business. I've personally had conversations with managers and business owners, and I can say the owners and managers, they do have concerns, of course. They don't want more costs, but they also see the logic of why this is needed and what the positives could be. They are fully aware that about the parking issues that exist at this time. BIA board understands the city policy and the meters are inevitable. We understand that what we are supporting will ultimately help the business district grow and be healthier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to next speaker, Susan Lilholt. Hi, Ms. Lilholt. Are you ready to go?
Yes.
Great. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and councillors. I'm Susan Lilholt, the former Executive Director of the South Hill or Fraser Street BIA, contracted from August 2015 to when I retired this year on March 31st. I continue as a volunteer advisor to the BIA board and in particular on the parking issue, which I worked on with city staff for 2 years. I'm here today in support of the administrative report submitted to you. The report, in my view, presents a balanced and quite comprehensive view of the issues, and I hope that with your support for today by repealing Bylaw 3808 and adopting the recommended amendments in principle, that the BIA and city staff will be allowed to bring our joint solutions to conclusion. When Council passed the new parking policy in January 2017, Eric Meidel, then parking manager for the city, met with our board, explained the changes and answered members' questions. After Eric had left, a straw poll showed unanimous board support for the installation of parking meters as the members realized that if we were to continue to create more space for customers, make it safe for everyone, and less polluted from cars circling the block in search of parking, we would need to manage it better. That meant also coordinating the installation of parking meters in our collective parking lots to avoid even further congestion there during peak hours. We subsequently submitted a 10-page proposal to the city with our concerns. No one likes the idea of paying for parking, and as you've seen, there will be some initial resistance to the idea, especially if a number of specific concerns of the neighborhood cannot be addressed. Nevertheless, last year I also received 2 complaints from businesses on Fraser Street saying that their customers could not find parking. The board recognizes this challenge and believes that businesses need to make it convenient for customers to find parking if the businesses are to continue to succeed. South Hill will continue to be a driving culture, situated as we are at the southern gateway to the Lower Mainland. Nobody cares to spend 2.5 hours on public transit to get from Surrey or Delta or Langley, so the car is a must. At the same time, South Hill is well balanced through different modes of local transportation. And working with the city, we've achieved a 100% bicycle score, a 91% walk score, and we are fairly well served by local transit on Fraser Street. Last year, with the help of the city, we installed the largest public e-hub of electric vehicle charging stations in our parking lots at 44th Avenue, and we're proud of the 47 electrical charges reported in the first week. In April, the BIA took receipt of 10 more bicycle racks. So overall, we have worked hard to create alternatives to the automobile and make our neighborhood greener over the years, and I know Rob Niger, our new ED, will continue to do so. But one truth remains. Parking on and off Fraser Street is as vital today to the success of this commercial neighborhood as it was in 1959 when the parking lots were created. Without these parking lots, this commercial district will disintegrate quickly. If our property and small business owners are relieved of paying a parking levy of up to $15,700 per property owner, this will go some way to giving them an added chance of survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyle-Holt. You do have questions, but before that, I believe that we may have a councillor that has a... I'm going to advance Councillor Weed first.
Yeah, I'm actually going to step away from this topic. I'm on the board of directors for Easy Park, and because of the direct correlation with the conflict of interest, I will be stepping out.
So Councillor Weeb is recusing himself? And I think we'll wait for Councillor Weeb to leave the chamber before we proceed. Okay, Ms. Lyle-Holt, you do have questions from councillors. So Councillor Bly, you have the floor.
Thank you. And hello, Ms. Lyle-Holt. Thank you for being here. I actually, just to address the first speaker's concerns, I think it is important that we understand under what circumstances would businesses not be a part of the overall BIA membership, or just to sort of be really clear on how that works.
Well, they would need to, when they register their business, sign at the beginning.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Sorry. They need to register their business at the beginning when they are on registering their business and location, that they sign up for the BIA at that time.
Okay, and if they don't sign up with the BIA?
Well, they are on the street and they are included in all communications. If they choose to be, and sometimes we've had the odd business say we don't want to receive the communications, but certainly newsletters and so on are distributed to everyone.
And distributed regardless of their membership to the BIA?
Correct.
Okay, and about what percentage of businesses would you say, I know you're retired, congratulations, but the number that may approximately not be a part of that membership?
Well, certainly the majority of businesses are, so I can't give you an exact number, but I would say it's easily over 90%.
90%. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Councillor Bly. And I'm just going to clear this queue. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Ms. Lyle-Holt. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sonia Gujral. Going once, going twice. Ms. Gujral, okay. Bob Baines. We have a winner. Come on down. Thank you, Mr. Baines. You do have 3 minutes, and there is a timer to your right. And if you can speak towards the microphone, that would be great.
My name is Bob Baines, and I'm an owner in the South Hill Business District for the past 6 years. I'm here representing members of the South Hill Business Association, residents, customers, and anyone else who signed the petition of over 3,000 people who are against the metered parking. Majority of the business owners in this area are all small businesses, and any percentage of lost customers would cripple or bankrupt, or could possibly bankrupt the business that in this area. On July 4th, I had a meeting with the city, BIA, and members of the South Hill Business Association. In the meeting, Rob Niger, Executive Director, said he spoke to many staff that are working in our area. And after speaking to those staff, he said that many of the staff say that they get 2 to 3 parking tickets a year, and they're fine paying that because they park their car all day in these lots. On July the 8th was the first day that we were supposed to be coming here for the hearing. I spoke to Lon Leclerc. He's the Director of Transportation. And I asked him if we could beef up the monitoring or ticketing in the area to maybe alleviate the problem of parking. And his response to me was he does not want to do that because it would piss off a lot of people. So I believe that metering would not be the position that the council should take, and look at alternative solutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baines. You do have a question from Councillor Dominato. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Baines, for coming today. I'm just curious about your comment about the concern around loss of customers. I live in an area that actually was lots of small businesses recently metered, and one of the challenges we were finding in that neighborhood was the fact that people were leaving their cars for long periods of time. And so if you're driving around looking to maybe stop at one of those small businesses, you couldn't find a parking spot. And so you just kind of keep on going. And so you end up at the big box store or something like that. Is that a concern at all around like turnover? Because that was sort of my experience, was driving along going, well, there's just no spots. So where do I guess I'll go somewhere else. So
But the behavior needs to change, right? If nobody is monitoring these back lots, why wouldn't you park there? Right? So if the city could monitor it more, start ticketing more to the people who are parking there every day, that would, give us more space for parking.
So more monitoring enforcement versus adding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because our big competitor would be Oak Ridge Mall. So if somebody's coming to our area now for free parking, what's to say they won't just go to Oak Ridge Mall? And that's the initial reason why they put these lots in back in 1959.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. That is all your questions from council. Thanks for coming out. Oh, you may have one from Councillor Fry. Yes, you do. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And sorry, Mr. Baines, I just listening to that. So, and you mentioned an interest in alternatives and stuff. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you'd be preferring a system that maybe had free parking, but more robust ticketing and turnover of cars, so really enforcing that it was a limited time option?
There's really been little to none ticketing in that area. So this is what people do. They just park their car all day and they think it's free parking.
Right.
If we do the monitoring and ticketing, that would change everybody's behavior.
Right. So there definitely is a problem with people just parking there and leaving their cars there, and that's you're not in disagreement with that assertion.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so maybe even a hybridized model that maybe saw a retention of some free parking and some metered parking might be, how would you feel about that?
In what sense?
Well, having some metered parking and some free parking.
In the back lots?
Yeah.
I think it should all be free. That's the reason the lots are put there in the first place.
Right. Well, our staff are advising otherwise. So I'm just wondering if more of a hybrid model might be a happy medium for you.
I think it should all be free.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. That's it for questions. Thank you very much for coming out. Okay. Our next speaker is Ahmed Siraj. Ahmed? Nope. Franklin Lowe. Hi, Mr. Lowe.
Hello. My name
Okay.
is Franklin Lowe. Thank you, Council Chairman. I'm a customer of the Fraser Street area. I am also a business owner of a Fido store at Main 16th. To start off, I like the comments about enforcement, and I think that would be a potential very effective solution as an alternative to this proposal, which I'm against. When I go there, I park for the parking limit is 2 hours in the back lots and 1 hour on the street. I park there. I've never gotten a ticket when I've gone over, and I've gone to that area for like over 20 years. So I don't believe there's a whole lot of enforcement, which I do believe would solve the problems that have been presented about turnover of cars. Right. So back to my Fido store at Main 16th. Several years ago, metered parking was brought in. Before the metered parking, my store did 50 to 70 new signups of customers per month. After the metered parking, it dropped down to the 30s. This is several years ago. We have still not recovered. We're still around the 30 range. So that's a good 50% reduction of our business. We've tried advertising to offer free parking. Like if a customer comes with us, we'll plug the meter for them. Didn't help. Simply, customers drive by, if they see the meters, they keep driving, they go to Oak Ridge or whatever other mall. I read the report. It mentions that peak usage is at 1 p.m. is around 96%. I look at that as a positive thing. That means people are going there, right? People are shopping in the neighborhood. And if you're looking at 1 p.m., you expect cars to be there parking because they're having lunch in the restaurants. So question would be, well, what's the usage like in other hours? Like what's it at 10 p.m., 10 a.m., 3 p.m., 5 p.m.? The report didn't really kind of cover what the usage is like during those hours. If we look at the neighborhood parking, it mentions, neighborhood parking there seems to be more and more cars in neighborhoods. I would suggest that possibly with single-family lots now having 4 suites, main suite, 2 basement suites, and a coach house. Maybe that's what's causing the cars there. And could even be possible that residents are parking in those lots in the back. Talking about the BIA, the executive, from my understanding, or the directors, I have to wonder how many of them are actually the landowners there rather than business owners. The landowners, if this goes through, they're going to get about $340,000 savings per year. And what's the likelihood that those landowners are going to pass that back on to the businesses, the tenants there? So the petition is, we have to wonder if 3,000 people, even though staff has concerns about the wording, I don't think that's insignificant. Half of them were businesses that are concerned about. So you have to wonder, how much did the BA actually talk to the businesses about these changes? So, last thing, can you please remove the parking meters at Main 16th? Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out, Mr. Lowe. You don't have any questions at this time. Appreciate you being here. Okay, Council, we had decided to defer questions to staff until after we heard from speakers. So there is an opportunity now to ask questions of staff if Council would like to do so. And I take it that's a yes by this cue. Councillor Bly, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. So a couple of questions. I wonder if we could hear a little more about the consultation with the businesses in regards to some of the concerns brought up, that some folks feel that they weren't consulted, or what that process looked like.
So we worked very closely with the BIA as a representative for the businesses, and they kept my understanding is they kept the businesses in the loop through their regular mechanisms through. Okay. But we were working with the BIA over a long period of time.
Okay. So to be clear, not that I don't disagree, but to be clear, our city staff did not go directly to the businesses. We worked through the BIA is what I'm hearing. Okay.
No, and just if a business reached out to us and we met with them, respond. I think there was, with Mr. Baines, there were an individual meeting.
Okay. What is the residential parking situation in that area in terms of resident parking restrictions, resident-only parking restrictions?
So it is a mix. There is some residential permit parking only, there's some 2-hour, and there's some unregulated throughout the area. I don't know the exact breakdown of what those are, but it is a mix.
Okay, that's fair enough. And in the discussion around enforcement, so to monitor a 2-hour limit on the back parking lots and a 1-hour on street parking, how would you staff that, if you could sort of ballpark for us? I mean, one thing to point out here, it's a difficult situation, but we're talking about revenue streams around parking, and the solution is to essentially pay for enforcement. I'm not suggesting one way is better than the other, but one is fairly counterintuitive to what we're attempting to do. And if I may, we do hear that down the road, when other areas like Mount Pleasant although that may not have been the direct experience of one of our speakers, they do see an increase in foot traffic in their stores, an increase in business. I've heard that in a number of BIAs right across the city. So my concern is looking at enforcement, what's the cost associated, if you could ballpark how that would be managed?
Sure. And maybe I'd just touch on a point that the city manager made earlier, is there's a lot of complexity in these reports, and there's some very specific questions brought to council here, but there's broader and unintended consequences. So your question about enforcement is directed to the parking lots, which are not the city street, which are not enforced by city staff. So the enforcement of the parking lot that's been raised would be done by Easy Park and would require additional resources. And if the following that suggestion of not including pay parking and just do enforcement, in order to enforce a 2-hour time limit is very, very labor intensive and would very likely require an addition of staff and resources for Easy Park to do that. Enforcement on city streets is done by city staff, and it is very inefficient in terms of enforcing those resident-only or time-limited, because you have to go back a couple of times and
Chop the tire, go back, see if the car's gone.
And so that, yeah. And again, in terms of this report, it's very precise. The question before council is related to the parking lots and the devolving the existing structure and the pay parking, the meter parking that's been discussed and discussed in the petition is not before council today. That's something that's contained in council in city policy and isn't before here. But there is an interrelationship between the two, and I realize I'm using your time. In order for us to meter the streets effectively, we would need to charge for the parking in these lots. There's about $600,000 in meter revenue that would be created by metering the streets, but we're not able to do that effectively without council passing this motion to deal with the lots, because we can't meter the streets if there's free parking on the lots right next to it.
Okay.
It's already full.
Very
I'm sorry
helpful.
for using
Thank
all
you for
your
taking
time,
all
but
of my
it's very
time.
precise in terms of...
I appreciate the response.
You do have 20 seconds, Councillor Blyer, but you don't have to use it. You're entitled.
The answer was so detailed, I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just advance. Councillor Hardwick, go ahead.
Thank you. What prompted this? Is the engineering department looking at surface parking lots around the city and going through an evaluation process?
Not the surface parking lot. We look at all the curb space around the city, and we look at occupancy. And as we see that space is occupied, then our policy is that we either add meters or increase the rate. If we see the space is not occupied, then we look at decreasing the rate. So we've got a dynamic pricing system for commercial parking on the street that is governed by occupancy. So,
right.
So the demand here raised for us, it was time to do metering on the street because it was over-occupied, more than 85% occupied, but we can't do that effectively with the parking lots remaining free. And so that's why we've brought this here first.
So it was an observation of the
street.
demand on the street that led to an examination of the surface parking lot. And you engaged with the BIAs around that. I just have a bit of a concern that there's a discrepancy between the BIAs and members of the BIA and the people. I mean, 3,000 is not a small number on a petition. There seems to be still quite a lot of disagreement on this. Have you had similar examples in other parts of the city where you've taken similar practices?
In areas where meters are being installed for the first time, it's not uncommon for the businesses lacking experience with the meters to have concerns about the installation of meters. In areas that now have meters and we look at changing the pricing, there's often a lot of support, sometimes even a request. One of the speakers, I said, nobody ever comes and asks to have meters. Right. They do sometimes come and ask about adjusting the pricing because they know that having a block occupied parking stalls doesn't help the businesses.
So there are other examples then of surface parking lots that have been converted into metered parking because of pressure on the street.
Yeah, not parking lots. I was referring to the on-street parking where we go from.
But that was the logic here. There's too much demand on the street, so we're going to restructure the relationship of parking on the lot. That's what I heard you say. Did I interpret that wrong?
Right. So we have lots, city lots that are free, and we have curb space that is currently free, and both of those are over-occupied and not providing the intended purpose, which is available parking for the businesses. In order for us to correct that, we need to deal with
But we don't have another precedent of a similar example that we could point to.
Not that I can think of that's a free city-owned lot that's adjacent. See, these lots were provided, not that I can think of that relates to a free city lot adjacent to a commercial street.
Are there other lots that you're looking at doing something similar then if this becomes a precedent?
We have the city doesn't operate many free lots. And that's correct. Yeah, I can only think of one other city lot that's free, and so we would look at that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the one he's.
That's all, Councillor Hardwick?
Yeah, no, I'm done. Thank you.
Councillor Fry, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Doblevoni. I want to preface this by saying I really like South Hill as a shopping destination. It's a really vibrant and eclectic, kind of complete community that we really want to encourage that kind of thing because it's got it all and stuff. And with respect to Mr. Lowe's comments about how relatively small changes to street parking had a pretty significant impact on his business, and I worry about the viability of I respect that an area like South Hill is, it's a delicate kind of balance. Have there been any consideration about maybe like tinkering around the edges a bit more and retaining some of the free lots, and allowing that option to retain, and maybe you have to walk, because I understand there's 12 lots between 6 blocks, and maybe having a couple of free lots so that if you're a cheapskate and you want to park there, you can still do that and spend the day doing whatever, shopping or what have you. Has there been any thoughts to that?
Not with the lots, because that's a more complicated process that requires coming to council as we are now to change a number of the bylaws. With the street, yes. So as we look at our parking policy is to keep the occupancy between about 65% and 85%, not higher than 85%, because that would mean there's less than one empty stall per block, and not lower than 65%, because that means it's not being well used. So as we monitor and meter the street parking, we do that very specifically block by block, and so we would not want to add more meters than are needed based on demand on the street. So where I think you were going was sort of a mix, and the mix would be if you were willing to walk 1 or 2 blocks, you would find free parking on the street. And if you wanted to park right in front of the store or right in the middle of the commercial district where there's more demand, you may pay $1 an hour. And so that hybrid model is how the street ends up operating.
This model will...
And free after 6.
Right, so just for clarification though, I mean, if presented with the option to shop at Oak Ridge or shop at South Hill, because Oak Ridge has free parking, there will be free parking remaining in some capacity in the South Hill Business District?
Yeah, so we monitor those commercial streets block by block, and all of our pricing is done very specifically block by block. If you're willing to walk a little bit further, which is a couple of blocks, then you would get out of the metered zone and be in a free parking zone. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And do we have an idea of how much free parking, or is that something that we would?
Well, we're only, and again, that's outside of the question before council, but how we operate the street is we're only looking at installing meters on the street in the blocks where the demand is so high that parking isn't currently available there on an ongoing basis. So as we get further down the street, the demand drops off, and we're not proposing meters for those lower demand blocks.
And so the operational component, handing this over to Easy Park, that's an all or nothing kind of thing. We're giving them all 12 backlots, or is that even?
Yeah, because there's a number of fundamental changes that are in these recommendations that are required for the lots. For the on-street parking, we do that on an ongoing basis following our city policy. So we look at occupancy 4 times a year. We use that data to either adjust rates up or down based on demand, or install meters or not. But so that's something we can be very nimble on strategically, whereas the lots are quite cumbersome for us. It requires us to come to council for this change.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. Just to confirm, the lots, the ownership of the lots is actually the City of Vancouver, correct?
Correct.
Just around the metering, because I'm sympathetic to the concerns that have been raised from small businesses around the possible impact and consequences. I know that you've had, like as I mentioned recently, in neighborhood we've added meters and in sort of the business district. I'm just curious if you could comment. Do we have data in terms of once we've added those meters, what the turnover looks like, and how frequently is that turnover happening? And so I'm just curious if you could speak to that, because I appreciate the concerns that are being raised about, are we going to lose customers, and are people not going to come? So, do you have any data around that, or do we collect that or track that?
Thank you to the chair. So after meters are installed, the best source of data we have is the occupancy after the fact. And so some really keen examples, like in the Olympic Village, meters are recently installed, and we saw a market change in the occupancy out on the street, and it's not nothing. It sort of gets down more to our level, the 60 to 85% target that we're aiming for. So we still know that street's being used, but it's available for the next person coming.
Okay. And then I just wanted to, there was a question from a speaker, and I'm sorry, I can't recall who it was, just around that a parking study hadn't been undertaken prior to this coming to council, but then I thought I heard another speaker say that, in fact, there had been a parking study undertaken for several years. So if you could just clarify that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've been monitoring this area for some time, looking at occupancy and doing the parking study. The reference in the report is that these parking lots are serving a deficiency in the area and related to development, and so they get a parking credit if these properties are developed because of the location of those lots. And we would look to maintain that because there would still be this parking in place, but it might require some further study to see how that credit would work. It's not related to an overall parking study. We absolutely have been monitoring this area and did an overall parking study. The issue in the report is reference to development of land in this area, continuing to get the credit of having those lots in the area, but we would look after these changes at doing a study to determine exactly what that credit would be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. You are under time, Councillor Dominato. Well done. Okay, so seeing no, thank you, Mr. Dubrowny. Seeing no further questions of council, looking around to confirm that from councillors, there is an opportunity to move the motion now. Would a council like to do that? Councillor Fry, seconded by Councillor Bly. Okay, so we now have a motion on the floor for council's consideration, and this is an opportunity, council, to speak to the motion if anyone would like to do so. Or not. Oh, we have one. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks very much, and I do appreciate very much the speakers who came and staff's presentation on this. And it's my experience within the city, and it's reflected also in the BIA presentation tonight, that parking that has tended to be free has tended to, in the city, get filled up with people who use it all day, and very much limits the time, the spots for customers of local businesses. And that's happened really in, it's been a long time we've had paid parking in downtown, but sort of in the other neighborhoods, it's happened sort of neighborhood after neighborhood, and there is always resistance to begin with. But I have talked to many BIAs who are very appreciative of the fact that paid parking has come in. It stopped people from parking for free in an area, then hopping on a transit, a bus or whatever to get to their other destination, usually to work, because they usually stay all day, and it really does limit the customers. You know, I am, that's the experience I come with to this decision. People talking to me about it. It's the experience that I reviewed in terms of the BIAs and both coming to reflect on the concerns with the unavailability of parking and the lack of turnover in the area. So I think that this will solve that problem. It's been the experience that it has solved the problem elsewhere in the city. So I am prepared to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Seeing no further comments from councillors at this time, we will proceed to take the vote. And you may vote now, Council. Okay, so that has passed unanimously with councillors present, with none in opposition. I do want to thank all of our speakers for coming out and council for their participation in that agenda item. I do want to take a moment now to address the earlier point of information raised by Councillor Hardwick as it related to the amount of time allocated for closing comments yesterday. And I can't speak, I have control over adjudicating this particular meeting as chair. I think that the point raised was a fair one, and I think it's been noted for the record. I don't believe that is correct, but I can't rule on it because it relates to a previous meeting. So I would note that Councillor Hardwick has noted her concerns for the record, and I would encourage you to follow up on that procedural item, Councillor Hardwick, with an email. Yes, it is. I think you had said that one, but I do agree it's a point of procedure. Yeah. But duly noted, and I appreciate that. And certainly we did observe the, I think, correct rule in this meeting today. So thank you for bringing that forward. And may I have, that concludes the official business of the held over council meeting today. May we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Bly, seconded by Councillor Dominato. All in favor? Carries unanimously. Thank you, council. Good work.